Okay, so you've been sharing some concerns about, where the world's headed and, citing things like the push for digital currency, all the talk about environmental toxins, and that feeling, that kind of nebulous feeling of a hidden agenda moving things in a direction you haven't really agreed to. And let me tell you, you are so not alone in feeling this way.
Not at all.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is.
So we're diving deep today into this conversation that Robert Martinez had with a prominent South American commentator, and they really dug into a lot of these anxieties and whether there's any reason for hope amidst kind of all the chaos.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, this conversation, because you're right. They don't shy away from any of those concerns that you just mentioned. They tackle them head on, but they do so within this broader historical and even astrological context, which I think is really fascinating.
Right. It's not like, any of this is coming out of nowhere, right? Like we
Yeah,
can kind of see the threads.
exactly.
So they bring up some really like specific concerns, things that really directly echo what a lot of you have been saying, things like digital currency, the potential pitfalls of, all this transhumanism stuff.
Right.
And even just like the way that information seems almost like manipulated these days.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that instead of getting like, bogged down in the fear of all of this, Martinez really points out that awareness of these issues, if anything, it seems to be growing. So what do you make of that?
Well, I mean, that's what's really fascinating here, is that Martinez sees this growing awareness as a sign that people are, as he puts it, waking up and beginning to question the narratives that they're being given. More and more individuals are feeling that sense of something's off that you described. They're starting to connect the dots and recognize that these seemingly disparate issues might actually be part of a larger pattern.
Which, in a way that's both empowering and terrifying at the same time. It's like, okay, I'm not the only one seeing this.
Right.
But then it's like, okay, but what does it mean that this agenda, as they call it, still seems to be like, moving forward anyway?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the core tension that I think they're really grappling with in this conversation.
Yeah.
And Martinez uses the example of, his own channel growing, more followers, more engagement, as evidence that this sort of silent majority of aware individuals is expanding, which I think is a really interesting point.
But the commentator kind of pushes back on that a little bit, right? Like, how much is it really a silent majority if they're just, listening to Martinez and not actually like doing anything?
Yeah, exactly. He raises the really crucial point. Awareness without action can only go so far. And this is where I think understanding those historical cycles that I mentioned earlier becomes really, really crucial. Because throughout history, we've seen this ebb and flow of power, periods of control, followed by periods of upheaval and change. And I think the question that we're wrestling with is, where does this increasingly informed but potentially passive populace fit into that cycle? And what does it mean for the future?
Okay, so we've laid out some of these, anxieties, these pretty heavy anxieties you've been feeling, and you're definitely not alone.
Right.
But this conversation with Martinez, it doesn't just like, wallow in all that darkness.
Yeah.
They actually spend a good amount of time digging into potential solutions, ways to navigate all of this, all these complex times. Absolutely.
And I know, for you and for a lot of you, it's not just about understanding, the problem, right? It's like, okay, well, what can we do? Like, what are the actual steps we can take?
Yeah, how do we actually navigate this?
Exactly.
And I think that's what's so refreshing about Martinez's approach here is that he doesn't just offer these vague platitudes or, kind of empty reassurances. He gets surprisingly specific.
Yeah.
For instance, he talks about the importance of using cash whenever possible,
That's right.
exploring alternative currencies, even just the simple act of like resisting those aspects of the agenda that just don't sit well with you.
Right, like where you can just be like, nope, not doing that.
Exactly. It's about reclaiming a sense of agency, even if it's just in these small ways. Which makes a ton of sense, right? Because when you feel like all these massive systems are kind of closing in on you, it's really easy to feel like, powerless.
Absolutely.
But what I'm hearing from him, and tell me if I'm, off base here, is that even those like small acts of defiance, those small acts of like choosing a different path, they can have like a ripple effect.
Absolutely. That's exactly it. He emphasizes that our inner reality, the way we choose to perceive the world and our role in it, that actually shapes our experience of the outer world.
Okay.
So even if we can't single-handedly dismantle, the entire system overnight.
Right.
Cultivating that sense of agency, of hope, of individual empowerment. Those things have power in and of themselves.
So not just burying our heads in the sand and
Yeah,
pretending everything is fine,
not at all.
but really being conscious about, okay, where am I going to focus my energy? Where am I going to focus my attention?
Precisely.
Mm.
And this is actually where Martinez brings up this really interesting example of collective action and resistance, and he points to what's happening in Spain.
Yeah. This is where that Spartan story comes in.
Yes.
I mean, it sounds almost too good to be true. So tell me more about that.
So Martinez describes this group in Spain that decided to inject some much-needed humor and lightheartedness into their protests against, the very systems that we've been discussing.
Interesting.
They dress up as Spartans and show up at demonstrations,
Wow.
but not with anger or aggression, but with this playful, joyful energy.
I love that because it really challenges, this idea of what we think activism has to look like, right?
Right.
Like it doesn't have to be all, doom and gloom. You
Right.
can fight for what you believe in and also embrace joy.
Absolutely.
And even a little bit of absurdity, I think.
Of course.
But what I find so fascinating about this is that approach, as silly as it seems on the surface, it's actually had a really tangible impact.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what makes it such a compelling example. They've managed to shift, I think, the tone of the entire resistance movement in Spain. By embodying this playful, courageous spirit, they're inspiring others to find joy and connection, even amidst these really challenging times. And I think it really speaks to the power of community, finding your tribe, those who share your values and are ready to stand alongside you, even if it's in a Spartan costume.
Right, exactly. Okay, so we've talked about individual action, we've talked about collective action, the power of, finding your tribe, even if your tribe shows up to protests in Spartan helmets.
Right.
But I know that the big question that a lot of you came here with is about the future.
Of course. Yeah.
Given everything, we've been talking about all these anxieties we've been kind of unpacking, is there a genuine reason to feel hopeful?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I have to say, I think Martinez, with his background in astrology, he brings a really fascinating perspective on this.
Yeah, we can't ignore that whole astrological prediction part of this conversation.
Right.
So without, getting too lost in star charts and all of that.
Right.
What's the kind of the gist of his outlook? Is there light at the end of this tunnel?
Well, he doesn't sugarcoat it. He predicts that things are going to get probably more intense, at least in the short term.
Okay.
He sees those in power kind of pushing their agenda, as he calls it,
Yeah.
even more aggressively in the coming, months and even years.
Okay.
But, and this is a crucial but, he also says that astrologically speaking, we kind of entered this period starting around 2023.
Okay.
Very similar to other points of kind of revolution and upheaval throughout history.
Okay, so not exactly smooth sailing then.
No.
But if I'm hearing you right, these periods of upheaval, while, obviously potentially tumultuous, they're also periods of massive potential, right?
Exactly. And this is where I think Martinez's message goes from kind of interesting to really empowering. He's very clear that just because, there are these astrological influences, these potential energies at play, it doesn't mean that we just kind of, sit back and wait for things to magically work out right.
Right.
These periods of change, of revolution, they demand our active participation.
Okay.
They require action, they require intention, and perhaps most surprisingly, they require a healthy dose of optimism, I think.
Hold on, optimism. As in, we look at all this chaos, and we just decide to be, positive about it.
Right.
That feels, I don't know, a little naive, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's the common misconception, isn't it?
Yeah.
That somehow optimism equals naivete. But Martinez, I think really importantly, argues that in this context, optimism isn't about being naive, it's a strategy.
Okay.
It's about choosing to focus on the potential for positive change, on the power that we each have to shape the future that we want to see.
So connecting this back to, to you listening and that desire for kind of actionable steps that you mentioned earlier, what's one thing, even a small thing, that you can do today that aligns with that strategy, that helps you kind of tap into that sense of agency, that sense of optimism?
Yeah, it's a powerful question to sit with, isn't it?
It is.
Because in the end, as Martinez so eloquently puts it, those who are kind of driving this agenda, they might have material resources on their side.
Yeah.
But those who who choose hope, who choose action, who choose to resist, they have something far more powerful, I think. They have the strength of their convictions, the power of their collective spirit.
And that is a force to be reckoned with. It's been quite a deep dive with us today, exploring these really complex and often, anxiety-inducing issues. But remember, you're not alone in navigating these times. You have the power to choose hope, to choose action, and to shape the future that you want to see. And on that note, this has been The Deep Dive.